But I think that is like the clearest message that we have. And also the fact that the people of Iran have a organized resistance, and that is what sets them apart from maybe a lot of other movements or government countries in the region. They have the capability to bring about that change. 120,000 people have been executed just for supporting this resistance movement, and this resistance is still standing, and it's been fighting for 60 years for freedom in Iran.
Welcome to the Conscious Radio Network, where curiosity meets conversation. Get enlightened and have fun. Share the experience with friends, family, and anyone ready for thought-provoking dialogue. You can watch our shows on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, or connect with us on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Our podcasts are also available on Libsyn, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other major platforms. Be sure to visit our official website at consciousradionetwork.com for past episodes, upcoming shows, and guest scheduling. And to our listeners around the cosmos, welcome. We're glad you're here. Subscribe, follow, and join the community.
This is the Conscious Radio Network.
Good day, everybody, wherever you might be on this spaceship we call Earth. Welcome to Conscious Radio Network's The Séance Podcast. I'm my host, Reverend Dr. Paul Meckes. If this is your first time, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, and also don't forget to follow or listen wherever you listen to your podcasts. Today, we are going to turn our attention to a story that extends far beyond the headlines, the ongoing struggle for freedom inside Iran. My guest today, Zolal Habibi, has spent decades advocating for human rights and amplifying the voices of those risking everything for change. We'll explore what really is happening inside Iran, the Iranian protest, and the Iranian people who are demanding and why the world should be paying attention. Let's welcome to the seance for the first time, Zolal Habibi. Welcome, my friend. How are you?
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be with you. And please allow me to greet those who are tuning into the podcast today. It's a delight to be with you and to be able to echo the voice of the Iranian people in these critical times.
Yes, it is. Very much. Now, you are with an organization called the NCRI Foreign Affairs Committee, correct?
Yes.
And for those who don't know what NCRI means, it's the National Council of Resistance of Iran. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do for the committee.
Just to give you a bit of a background, the National Council of Resistance of Iran is a parliament in exile that was formed in July 1981 with the sole mission to be able to have this regime overthrown, but also to make sure that there is a transfer of power to the people of Iran. So to be able to transfer sovereignty to the people of Iran, and that is the main goal of this movement. I have been involved, as you mentioned, for decades now with this movement, and it's in different capacities depending on the situation and the circumstances. But one of our main issues of concentration has been continuously the human rights situation in Iran, the plight of the people inside of Iran, and also to try to be able to inform the international community of the crimes perpetrated by this regime, but also what are the outlooks and the solutions in face of this brutal regime.
Yeah. Now, for 25 years, you've been advocating with the NCRI. You must have seen and experienced a lot of stuff, I have to say.
Yes. That is the least that can be said. Yeah, it has been very turbulent times, and we've been through many difficult circumstances. But what's important is that we've also always persevered and have been able to move forward.
Yeah. What was that pivoting point in your life that got you involved with the NCRI?
I was introduced to the NCRI and their work from the onset, from childhood. My parents were both activists with the Iranian resistance. My father was a prominent writer and a human rights activist, And due to the nature of his work, I guess we were introduced into the situation in Iran from early on. I remember I was like about 4 years old, I think, the first time I met people who were like victims of torture.
Yeah.
I'd come to the US to come and testify at the US Congress and at the United Nations, but I had the opportunity to meet them because they were staying at our house for about 2 weeks. I was able to meet them at a personal level and continuously even though I was a child, it really did have an impact on me, knowing them and knowing what their stories were to some extent. And I think the first protest that I went to, I was only 3 days old. This has always been a part of my life, but I guess the turning point for me was probably in summer of 1999. At that time, I had just graduated from high school and I was on my way to college. I had gotten a full scholarship to go, and I was going to go and pursue medicine, but student protests broke out in Iran in July of that year. And they turned to nationwide uprisings. And that was the first time we were seeing nationwide uprisings in Iran after over a decade. Because during the 1980s, I think the last major protest that had broken out in Iran, like at a very large, extensive level, was in September of 1981, which was brutally cracked down. And on that day, over 1,500 people were executed in the streets.
Wow.
The streets, and most of them were teenagers. And that was like a turning point in Iran's history. And then executions and unfortunately the violence of the Iranian regime continued, with the 1988 massacre being one of the major points in this history, where Khomeini had 30,000 political prisoners executed in a matter of 5-6 weeks.
Wow.
So before anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late. And with that, he was able to spread complete fear in society. And so this was 11 years later. The new generation, the generation that were born after the 1979 revolution, they were the ones who were coming to the streets now against this regime. And it was also the first time that these things were being televised or shown, because it was the start of cable television and cable news networks, CNN and whatnot was new. And so we were seeing the footages coming from Iran. So that really made it more palpable for me, who I was growing up abroad. And that was a turning point for me. I remember thinking to myself, what are you going to do? Are you just going to be a bystander and watch from a distance what is happening? And then maybe once Iran is free, you're going to go to Iran? Or what are you going to do about it? Because I always felt some kind of responsibility towards what was happening in Iran, because that was how I was raised. That's what I saw from my parents, especially because, just to give you a bit of a background, my father was killed by the regime in 1988. And wow. I knew that standing for democracy, standing against this regime, came with a price. And that price is usually pretty high. But that was the reality of our lives. And my mom, after my father was killed, she decided to dedicate her life to the cause of freedom in Iran. And she joined the Iranian resistance at the age of 25. And you could just imagine, with two small kids, and it's a very different dynamic. And so I had them as role models. They taught me what was important in life, I think, not through their words, but through their own actions, that there are times that there are things that are bigger than us that are worth making those kind of sacrifices for. And also growing up knowing the reality that over 120,000 people had been executed for freedom in Iran, that really, I guess, had an impact on me. And I remember thinking that day, a year before making the decision, I had just randomly ran into an article that had been printed in a youth magazine. It's a Farsi youth magazine printed in LA, and it said there were, in 1998, there were 20,000 Iranian doctors working in the US. And I remember thinking to myself, are you going to be one of those 20,000? or are you going to be one of those who frees Iran so these 20,000 can go and actually serve their own people?
Yeah.
And so that is when I decided to join the resistance, and it's almost 27 years now since that day.
Man. Yeah, 27 years. That's a while. Of course, and the regime's been in power 47 plus years.
Yeah, 47 years.
Yeah, it's amazing. Do you see a turning point happening with what's going on today? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel?
Most definitely. I think that when you look at everything that has been happening since the beginning of the year, so if you look at the uprisings that broke out on December 28th, 2025, and also what led to that point, the fact that the Iranian regime, it executed over 2,200 people in 2025. And on the other hand, you see this brutal suppression internally, you see the economic collapse in Iran. It really made life unbearable for people to live. I remember, like, if you look back in December, people in Iran didn't have electricity for at least 2 or 3 hours a day because of the policies of the IRGC, and that they were using all of that electricity and all of the water resources for their own projects and whatnot. So literally, there was an aspect in people's lives that you could put your finger on that had not been completely destroyed by this regime. Yeah. On the other hand, with everything that had happened in the previous year, the regime was in a very weak position, especially after the fall of Bashar Assad. So if you look from December 2024 till now, everything has been leading to this point where the regime has been becoming weaker and weaker step by step. So this was all something that was brewing in Iran society. I think if you look in the last decade, we've had 4 major uprisings in Iran.
Yeah.
And each time it evolved, it becoming more radical, it becoming more defiant, and the slogans, the call for action that people have, and the resilience, you see that. And so it was very clear in January with the uprisings. It started from the bazaar, which is Iran's economy, or the backbone of Iran's economy, really. And whenever they enter into something like this, it's a major turning point. The same way that, like, when the bazaar entered in the revolution in 1979, 1978, it was a turning point. So everyone knew that the bazaar getting involved, that's a turning point. And the fact that the first group that joined these strikes and protests were the students, so automatically the span of generations, they all came together in this united voice and throughout Iran. And so you see that across all walks of life, the span of generations, everyone's coming to the streets together in one unified message. Their slogans were down with a dictator, down with Khomeini, and this is your final year, Khomeini. This is the year of blood. This is your final year because of all the executions that he had committed. So you saw those slogans coming together, and also you saw, like, everyone said one thing that was different. You could see hope in people's eyes in the streets, and this resilience and this defiance. And if you look at the videos, unfortunately, there was that 19-day internet blackout, and then so many things that have happened after that. Maybe not enough attention was paid to what was happening in January. Yeah. But if you look at the videos from the protests, then you see that you could see a organized nature in the protest. You could see, like, in a lot of the videos, that there are teams who come and they direct the protest. They are able to get people organized, so they're able to even protect people. And that is something that was really a changing point, and the regime understood that, because if you look, the brutal crackdown was on January 8th and 9th, but January 6th, 2 cities were liberated by the people. And you were seeing that message was, like, going across Iran. So it was like on on the 6th and 7th, sorry, on the 5th and 6th, these two cities were liberated. The message was going very extensively everywhere on social media. This is what we're supposed to do. This is like the roadmap. We need to free up however many cities that we can. It doesn't matter how small your city or town is, but if we take those into our own hands and are able to disarm the suppressive forces, we have the power to change the situation, because the regime is in a very weak position. And so that is why the regime was looking for the slightest excuse to be able to open fire. And unfortunately, we saw the bloodbath that they created on the streets of Iran and during the internet blackout. And I think, like, for instance, based on the statistics and information that we have, unfortunately, we do not have the confirmed number of those who were killed in the protest. We have been able to gather the names of over 2,600 people who were killed. When you look at them, many of them are Gen Z. Some are even in their teens, early 20s mostly. But you also see like people from the different generations too. But I think one of the things that was very interesting to me was that there is a phenomenon in Iran. It's called resistance units. Resistance units it's part of a strategy for the overthrow of the regime, because I think today everyone knows that this regime is not going to be overthrown with peaceful protest.
No.
It's going to use brutality and force. And as we have said for 20-something years now, the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. It's to support the Iranian people to create change. It's not only a matter of principle that we say the solution is neither war nor appeasement, even though that is enough grounds to stand on. But even if you look at it from a practical perspective, historic perspective, or military perspective, the solution to Iran is not foreign war and it's not appeasement, because first of all, appeasement is what leads to a war. And that history has shown that time and again. What happened in World War II? It's the exact same process.
Yeah.
People appeased Hitler to a certain extent that there was no turning back, and so they had to enter the war. And it's very important to learn your lessons from history. On the other hand, the Iranian regime is not a classical dictatorship. It's not like for instance, when you compare it to Venezuela, you take out the head of that system collapses. Or like, for instance, with the Shah, when the Shah was forced to escape Iran, within 2 weeks, the whole system collapsed and the revolution was completed. So that's because that is a classical dictatorship. When you remove the head, it falls. This regime is a theocracy. It's supposed to be a republic. So it has its apparatus and it has its system. When you remove the top head, the system doesn't collapse. It's still there because it has those systems that it has built over the years to make sure that when this day comes, it's not able to collapse that easily. The same way that when Khomeini died in 1989 and Khomeini replaced him, nothing happened. But at that time, people thought if Khomeini dies, this regime is gone. But that wasn't the case. So that is the situation, unfortunately. So with bombings over the head and just removing the tops of this regime, the regime is not going to fall. But on the other hand, if you look at Iran's geography, Iran is a very big country. It's 3 times the size of Iraq, 4 times the population. Unfortunately, the Iranian regime is also the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. When something like this breaks out in Iran, it's not going to be limited to Iran's borders. We saw in this war 12 other countries who were targeted by the Iranian regime as a retaliation, because this regime, it strives on chaos and crisis. And that's been its MO since like day one, since 1980, if you look. The hostage taking and then the Iran-Iraq war for 8 years, and it has always survived in these type of circumstances. And so they play that card. And right now they're playing both the victim card for some and then the hero card for others to try to be able to stand afloat. But on the other hand, when you look at Iran's geography, as I was saying, we have desert, we have mountain ranges, we have jungle, we have metropolitan areas. And if you're not going to be able to, with bombs over the head, you're not going to overthrow this regime, you need troops on the ground. Troops on the ground is not very likely for any government. So it has to come from the people of Iran. And also, if you look at history, we also have the experience of foreign intervention in our country, which is something that we don't have a good recollection of or memory of. Because if you look in the last 100 years, Reza Khan, he was brought in through a coup, and then he was taken out when he wasn't serving those purposes anymore. His son was brought in, and then at the beginning, his son didn't have the foothold that his father did, so he had to keep some balances with Western powers or whatnot. And that's what allowed the people of Iran to actually pursue that constitutional revolution that they had created in 1906. And we've only in our entire history, had one democratically elected leader, prime minister, and that was Dr. Mossadegh. And he was in power in office for 2 years. And unfortunately, in 1953, there was a coup d'etat against Dr. Mossadegh for nationalizing Iran's oil by the British and the US, by the CIA and MI6. And Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was reinstated. This time, he knew that he had to rule with the iron fist if he wants to keep his power. You saw a one-party rule, the Savak becoming stronger and stronger in their suppression and the executions, the tortures. And that is exactly what led to the 1979 revolution. And then 1979 revolution, the people of Iran revolted and they were able to overthrow the monarchy. But it was the Cold War era and Western powers were worried about what comes next. And about 6 months before the fall of the Shah, so actually in September 1978, there was this protest, September 8th, 1978, in Iran, that the Shah opened fire on protesters and over 1,000 people were killed on the streets that day. And that was a point that Western powers realized the Shah is not going to be able to keep his power. And so Khomeini was brought he was in Najaf in exile in Iraq. He was brought to France. And there was a meeting in Guadeloupe in French territory. And they made what the Western governments made agreements with Khomeini. Khomeini made some beautiful promises to them that there will be democracy in Iran and that he doesn't want any part in power and this and that. And unfortunately, he was brought in and the people of Iran have been paying that price for 47 years now.
How did that change? How did that change? Like, what was it that went from lightness to darkness?
It's one thing. Opportunism is always a thing, right? It's one thing to say the things or have them just mere words or just written on paper is one thing. Something that has not gone through the test of time is something else. And I think that's what's really important. That's like the lesson learned for Iranians. But the reality is that, back then, no one knew about Khomeini's mindsets and everything. And it wasn't like the age of technology that we have today and information. Khomeini had written a book. There's this green book that he has. And in it, he had written all of these ideas of creating an Islamic state that goes from Iran to Jerusalem and all of that. And his backward mindsets in regards to especially like his misogynist views, his just, I don't even want to call it fundamentalism, but like Islamic fundamentalism or the backward mindset that he has, it was all written in there, but no one had really seen that book really. He had opposed the Shah during the White Revolution, which was some reforms that were made during the Shah's time. His opposition to the Shah was on the positive things that reform brought, not the negative aspects of the reform, because the reform was had some negative aspects that were really affecting people. But he wasn't attacking the Shah for that. He was attacking the Shah for giving women's rights and things of that nature. So that was the background, and people didn't know that. And also, you have to understand, back then, the Shah, after the coup d'etat against Dr. Mossadegh, he forbid all political organizations, associations, anything that had like the slightest political context. Even like singers were arrested for like songs that they sang.
Wow.
Or writers were killed. If you look at the list of the political prisoners were executed back then, a lot of them were like writers, journalists, poets, things of that nature. And so at that time, everything had to go underground or it was forbidden.
Yeah.
The only network that had the room to grow in Iran was the clergy. And this is really important, an interesting aspect, because the Shah justified his power the same way that Khomeini justified his power, by saying that they have this divine calling or whatnot. So if you look at the Pahlavi dynasty, if you pay attention to their names, they all have Reza in their name, so and so on.
Yeah.
The reason is because the 8th Shiite Imam is Imam Reza, who is the only Iranian Imam, and his burial site is in Mashhad, which is in Iran. And so he wanted to make that direct connection.
Yeah.
To be like, we are the descendants of him.
Wow.
And also the Shah there's actually an interview with him that he says, when I was 5 years old, Imam Ali came into my dreams and told me that you're the chosen one and you have this divine responsibility and whatnot. And he used to call himself the shadow of God on earth. So for that, he needed the support of the clergy. So you see in the time of Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran's mosques went from 500 mosques to 5,000 mosques. So the only network that was growing and was being organized were the clergy, which Khomeini was heading, but it was because it would serve the purposes of the Shah.
Yeah.
And now, overnight, now it's serving the purposes of Khomeini. So that is the reality, unfortunately. And the people who had actually created the revolution, like those were like the progressive movements. There were a lot of progressive movements back then. It was the era of revolutions and things in the world. They were mostly in prison or they had been executed. And the last set of political prisoners were released on January 20th, 1979. And 2 weeks later was the revolution. So it was already too late when they were released because Khomeini already had his grip on power. And so that really didn't allow those who had created the revolution to come into power, especially because Western powers were also concerned that Iran probably had one of the largest common borders with the USSR at the time. And Iran always plays a very important geopolitical role in the region. So they were very worried in the Cold War era where Iran is going to fall in the Cold War with the Shah being taken out. So is it going to align itself with the USSR or with the West? And Khomeini was making those guarantees because he said, look, if anything, one of our main slogans of Khomeini was death to communism, because communists don't believe in God, and that was like where he drew his line. So they didn't have worries in regards to the USSR and Khomeini cooperating, which they were wrong about when you go down the line. And unfortunately, the people of Iran paid that price. So that is like the background of foreign intervention in Iran. So when you see Iranians who are worried about foreign intervention, is because they know first of all, Iran is a rich country in natural resources. It plays a very important geopolitical role. And so they know that there are a lot of, I guess, interest groups or those who have interests in Iran that don't necessarily align with the interest of the Iranian people. And that's why they are very hesitant on foreign intervention, and that's why we believe that our people have the potential to bring about that change. We always say that no one's going to scratch your back except your own finger, and no one's going to hand us freedom in a silver platter. We have to pay the price for it, but we're willing to pay that price, and we are willing to make that sacrifice. But we call on the international community to actually stop the appeasement policy toward the regime and instead recognize the right of the Iranian people to take their destiny into their own hands.
It also doesn't look like much changed after Soleimani's son came into power too. Not much has changed.
An apple doesn't fall far from the tree. He has been working with his father for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
If anything, we see the rise of executions, especially in the final days of the war. 13 political prisoners were executed within a 10-day time frame. 7 of them are protesters from the January protest, some being as young as 18 and 19 years old. And then 6 political prisoners for affiliation with the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. And I think that sends the clearest message to anyone who's trying to pay attention of what the regime fears the most and what the regime sees as a threat to its existence.
Yeah.
The fact that you're carrying out these executions during the war, it shows that that is what you're fearing. And the fact that the head of Iran's judiciary actually came to the scene and said, after these executions, that we need to expedite these executions and we need to carry them out at a larger pace. And I think that spoke volumes, because the reality is that the regime knows at the end of the day, they're not going to fall with this war, but they know that because of the circumstances and the fact of everything that they saw in January, the people of Iran want change, and they're not going to stop until they see that change. I think if you look at how things were evolving in February of this year, before the start of the war, this is something that I don't think much people got to see in the West, just due to the fact that there was that 19-day internet blackout. And then after that, it was talks of war started. So everyone was just concentrating on, is there going to be a war? What's going to happen? No one was paying attention to what's happening on the ground inside of Iran, actually. In Iran, there's this ritual that we have that when people pass, they hold memorial services on the 40th day of their passing. And those 40th day memorials were between like mid-February till end of February. That was like the time that people were holding them throughout Iran. If you look at those memorial services, even though the people of Iran were mourning those losses and the thousands of people who had been killed, but those families turned those memorial services to acts of defiance in face of the regime. You saw people celebrating the lives of their children who had been killed. You saw people coming out by the thousands for these memorial services and making pledges to continue the path of those people who had been killed. And so the regime really feared that. They started showing up at funerals or the memorial services and said, if anyone chants, we will have you arrested. And they actually did open fire on some of the events and they did arrest people, but still people came and they were taking part in this. And this is a time that after the uprising till that point, there was martial law all over Iran. So it wasn't people didn't really have the possibility to come to the streets because of the martial law.
Yeah.
But they were using these ceremonies to come to the streets. And for the regime, this was a reminder of how the 1979 revolution came about. At that time, it was also like people were being killed in the protest. And then there was the 40th memorial service of them. People would come there again. The Shah's regime, they would have people killed again in those ceremonies with the attacks. And then it was like the protest back then went from 40th to 40th. And that's what led to the revolution. So for the regime, they understood this is the same concept. On the other hand, we saw the regime had shut down all college campuses after the uprising and had said all classes would be online. So they were trying to resume classes they were supposed to resume classes on February 22nd. On February 22nd, that classes resumed in person in universities, protests broke out throughout universities in Iran. And it was on like the first day of returning, there were protests. It was with the excuse of honoring those students who had been killed in the protest, but that protest began. And within 3 days, the regime was not able to curb the protest in the universities. And so they shut down all universities again until further notice. They had said till April, because that would be the end of the celebrations of the Persian New Year. But right now they have said indefinitely all classes are online. They're not going to resume colleges right now.
Wow.
So, and at the same time as these student protests were happening on February 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 25th, on February 23rd, 250 members of resistance units carried out an organized attack on the headquarters of Khomeini. And the headquarters of Khomeini were the most secure location in all of Iran at a time that it was on heightened security because they feared that the war would start any day. And the fact that these people were able to carry out this operation, the message for people inside of Iran was the regime is in much weaker position that they show themselves. And it also was giving like the signal was this is going to be the new norm for Iran. And this is the direction that we're going to be moving towards. So that is what we're mobilizing for and we're working towards. It's going to be, from this point on, it's going to be a combination of protests on the ground, because there was the student protest at the same time, and operations targeting centers of oppression or major centers of the regime.
Yeah.
And that is what's going to bring about the regime change. Just to give you some statistics on that, resistance units carried out 630 operations during the protest in January to safeguard the protesters. They were like, for instance, disarming the suppressive forces. They even some locations where they had, because 50,000 protesters were arrested, but they were able to target some of those like places that protesters were being kept in and have them released, or even the cars that they were having the arrested taken, people were able to attack them, the protesters, and they were able to release those who had been arrested and things of that nature. So they had done that. And just in 2025, resistance units, their activities were always concentrated on two things. One is raising awareness in society, and the other is targeting the centers of oppression. So they carried out 13,000 awareness campaigns in Iran in 2025.
Wow.
And they had also carried out 4,092 operations targeting centers of oppression. So that is why people were like, this time when we came to the streets in January, we felt like we knew what we were supposed to do. That's why you saw people being on the offensive and just being organized, because that is what they had learned from all of these awareness campaigns that they saw continuously throughout society. Even if you didn't put the dots together under normal circumstances, when you were in that position, it all came back to, oh, this is what we're supposed to do. Oh, this is the direction that we need to go to. And that is why I think that the Iranian regime fears nothing more than the people of Iran themselves, especially when it becomes like organized resistance.
Yeah. Now, when we see all the stuff on mainstream media, we said it was going to take 5 weeks. Now we're what, in 7, 8, something like that. And it just seems like there's always something up their sleeve. There's always something happening. There's somebody always in control. Do you see anything? How close do you see a complete, total collapse where there's nobody left in control of power or the regime?
I think that, as I said, I think that we will be able to see change once this war is like completely over, because right now the regime has used war as an excuse to, first of all, when there are bombs over your head, you're going to have to take refuge. The circumstances are not normal for people inside of Iran to come to the streets or do anything against the regime, really. On the other hand, the regime has set up checkpoints practically all over the country. They say if you want to go through like a distance that's 30 minutes by car, you will at least pass by 2 or 3 checkpoints. And the checkpoints are not just checking your car. They are taking people's phones and checking their phones. Like, even though there's an internet blackout right now in Iran, today is day 52 of the internet blackout in Iran. And despite that, the regime takes people's phones, they check their phones, they check what apps they have recently used and things of that nature. So everyone's like, don't take your phones with you. But that is also one of the things that the regime is flagging. One of the protesters who was executed 2 weeks ago, one of the charges that they said about him was the fact that he probably had, this was something that he had thought about beforehand or what planned in advance, because he didn't have a phone with him to give evidence of who he is or what he is linked to or whatever. That is what we saw. So this war has created a pretext for the regime to suppress, crack down on society at a larger extent. So first we would have to see that going aside to some extent. And there's also martial law, and then also because of the war and everything. And that would have to, after that, the circumstances change a bit. I think we will see very soon things perspire on the ground. I think that we will see the continuation of the activities of resistance units, and it's growing because what we see right now is this new momentum and mobilization efforts on the ground, because people, I think they have hit a point of no return, really, because a lot of the youth that you speak to in Iran, they say, look, we're alive, but we're not living. This is not a life what we have.
Yeah.
On the other hand, they have learned from, if you look at, as I said, in the past decade, we've had 4 major uprisings. Each time the uprisings are, people come, there's a spark, people come to the streets, people are willing to pay the price, because it always comes with a price, because the Iranian regime uses suppression, brutal force to suppress the protests. And then with that deadly suppression, they're able to push people back in their homes until the next time that there's a spark, and then this cycle continues. People are like, we have to break this cycle. We can't let that continue. So we need to take matters into our own hands. And that is something that I think now more than ever before, people are realizing, like, look, there is no other solution. The solution lies in our hands, and we are that force for change. We have that agency, we have that potential, and we also have the capability and the capacity to bring about that change. We just need to become more organized and work together and be concentrated on that final goal. And I think that is what we're seeing come about in Iran. And I think that is also what we are seeing with, just when you look at these facts and figures from 2025, or the fact that over 2,000 members of the resistance units were arrested in the January uprising. So that in itself tells you like how extensive they are inside of Iran, that 2,000 of them have been arrested. Yeah. But also, I think this shows you the direction of like where things are going. And I think also with the executions that were carried out in March of this year, that it has made a major impact in Iran's society, especially some of the cases. Like, for instance, the 6 political prisoners, there's a lot of video footage of them coming out, things that they had smuggled out of prison or notes in their letters. And everyone, they're in awe of who are these people.
Yeah.
Their bravery, their level of understanding, because they are seeing in them, in their stories, in their messages, they're seeing, look, this is the bright future that we have ahead of us. these were like the cream of the crop of Iran society, and this is the direction that they were going in. And that has created like this huge momentum in Iran society right now of people wanting to learn more, or wanting to be like them or learn from them. What is this path that they were going? Why did they decide to join resistance units knowing that the cost could be their lives? But they did that. And I think if you could, in comparison, it might be comparable to, I'm from the generation that was born after the revolution, but I've always heard from those who were like teenagers during the 1979 revolution that there were a few political prisoners that their stories and also their testimonials, which had come out, they really moved Iran society. One was Mehdi Rezai, who was called the Red Rose of the Revolution. He was executed at the age of 19 after severe torture, but his court was actually made public because he was able to trick the Savak into thinking that he's going to cooperate with them. So they wanted to use that. And then he just turned the whole scene to being against the Shah. And there were foreign reporters who reported it, so it got out. And then there was also Gole Sorkhi, who was a Iranian poet, and his testimonial, the video of it still exists. And it's really, our generation still gets a lot of our ambition from what they stood for. And so that everyone in Iran is saying like these six, they've had that kind of impact.
Yeah.
For the younger generation now, because a lot of these younger generations, they were born in the 90s or 2000s or whatnot. They don't have a recollection of what happened in the 1980s and those brutalities, who were the ones who stood in face of it. So now they are just meeting these cases and they're learning about them, and they see it. There are people from their own generation who decided to join the resistance, and so they have turned to inspiration for the younger generation now.
Yeah, man, I wish I had hours to talk about this, because it's not only your story, but it's a history lesson. It's to let people know, the newer generation worldwide. And it's a sad too of what's on the news and what we see on some global news outlets. What's really being told? What are we really being shown? And it's a lot. Yeah, there's so many people who really don't know, except for those who lived back in the late 70s, who were alive then. And as a takeaway, before we close the show, as a takeaway for our audience, some words of wisdom. What is it that you truly want people to know, our audience to know, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel? And what is it that they should be paying attention to? Was it the news? Is it what is it? And so what do you have as a takeaway for?
I think I'll try to keep it simple, and I think that is best summarized as with what Mrs. Maryam Rajavi says. Maryam Rajavi is the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran for the interim government after the overthrow of the regime. She has, as I told you before, like for 22 years, she has been saying that the solution, there is a third option on Iran. So the option on Iran, the solution on Iran, is not neither war nor appeasement. It's to support the people of Iran to bring about change. But also, the people of Iran are not stuck choosing between the current theocracy and the previous monarchy, which was a dictatorship too. The people of Iran want to move forward to a secular democratic republic. So secular meaning not a theocracy, democratic meaning not a dictatorship, and republic not being a monarchy. But I think that is like the clearest message that we have. And also the fact that the people of Iran have a organized resistance, and that is what sets them apart from maybe a lot of other movements or government countries in the region. They have the capability to bring about that change. 120,000 people have been executed just for supporting this resistance movement, and this resistance is still standing, and it's been fighting for 60 years for freedom in Iran. So I think that is a key takeaway. And also, what guarantees are there? Because this is a question that comes up. What guarantees are there that this regime won't be replaced with something like the same thing with, after the Shah, it was replaced by Khomeini, who was a worse dictator. I think what guarantees are in place is, like, for instance, the National Council of Resistance of Iran has a plan for a 6-month interim government, which would be based on the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajavi. I think that 10-point plan in itself serves as like a guardrail to make sure that we keep on that same correct path and it doesn't turn into a dictatorship. But I also think that having a resistance that has withstood the test of time, that's really important, because it's one thing to have things on just mere words or just written on paper. It's another when you have seen it in practice. Like when this movement says we believe in equality, for instance, that since 1989, all of the secretary generals of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran have been women, or 52% of the National Council of Resistance of Iran are women, and the president-elect is a woman. That's very important. Or like when they call for separation of religion and state, that the group that ideologically or religiously they believe in Islam, but they believe in separation of religion and state, and they're the ones who are calling for a secular state. So that in itself, I think, speaks volumes. Or the fact that the main victims of torture and execution under the Shah's regime and the Mullah's regime are the ones who are calling for the abolition of the death penalty and all forms of torture, because they say, look, this cycle is never going to end unless we put an end to it. And they believe that no one has the right to take away someone else's life. And, or like, for instance, when we talk about Iran's ethnicities, the fact that the National Council of Resistance of Iran in this 10-point plan calls for their autonomy and for their rights to be respected, while unfortunately they have bared the discrimination and the suppression under both dictatorships. So I think all of these are very important key points. Or for instance, when we call for a non-nuclear Iran, this movement is the movement that first revealed to the world Iran's nuclear program. If it wasn't because of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the world would have never known that Iran has a nuclear program. And it would have been too late and so I think that if you look at the 10-point plan, it's a clear roadmap, and it's very important to support the people of Iran for change. The people of Iran are not looking at outsiders to do something for them. They want to take their destiny into their own hands, but it's really important for the world to allow that, because unfortunately, till now, the main victims of the policy of appeasement have been the people of Iran. And the Iranian resistance is the one who has been used as the bargaining chip at this negotiation table for decades now. We need to see an end of that to then allow the people of Iran to take their destiny into their own hands.
Yeah. Now, where can people find the NCRI, the National Council of Resistance, and how they can get involved?
To learn more, because I think raising awareness is key. But to learn more, you could visit the ncr-iran.org, or to learn more about Maryam Rajavi, you can visit maryam-rajavi.com or maryamrajaviforchange.com. And if you would like to get involved, if you are in the US, there's the Organization of Iranian American Communities. It's oiac.org. They have chapters in over 40 states. So you're probably mostly covered there. If you reach out to them, they could put you in contact with local chapters. They do have a lot of different types of activities. Every help, they're grateful for it. But they do carry out both a lot of work in Capitol Hill, but also locally with protests, exhibits, info booths, different types of activities. Yeah. And if you're in other countries, you could reach out to iranfreedom.org, and they could put you in contact with local chapters.
Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. And awesome with the work that you're doing. 25 years and growing. Very good. Things happen around the world, and most of the world will never, ever know about it until something like this happens. And it's about time that the people of Iran, the citizens of Iran, become free. It is a massive human rights struggle, and I really pray that it gets resolved. And I want to thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you, and hopefully we will soon be able to invite you to a free Iran.
Yes. It's a beautiful country. I've seen pictures, videos, and
Yeah.
friends have been there, and it's a beautiful country. Very beautiful
It is.
country.
It is a beautiful country with a beautiful culture
Mm,
and a rich history. And
yeah.
just imagine, Iran has the greatest brain drain in the world. Just imagine if the people of Iran would actually be able to serve their own people.
Yes.
Iran would flourish really quick.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. And I pray it does. Yeah. Yeah. Zalal,
Thank you very much.
blessings, my
It was
friend.
a pleasure to be with you.
Likewise. And thank you, everybody, for watching Conscious Radio Network's The Séance. And we will see you